Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We'll just give it a few seconds for people to join. Good evening, folks who are just joining us. Good evening, folks. We'll just give it a few seconds for people to join. Hi, Janet. How are you? Nice to see you again. Still got a few people joining. Good evening to folks who are just joining. Hi, Carol. Glad you're looking forward to tonight, so are we. We're good, thank you, Janet. Yeah, we're good. Excited for this evening. Good evening, folks who are just coming in. Hi, Tony. Hi, Peter. Nice to see you. And good evening, folks who are coming in. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Trish. Okay, we've got a few more people coming in, but we'll make a start, I think. So, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the online Naturetrek Roadshow. For those of you joining for the first time, I'm Sarah Frost. I'm Naturetrek's marketing manager and a cruise leader, and I've worked for Naturetrek for 6 years now, and I'll be your host this evening, speaking to you from Hampshire. Now, as many of you know, we'd normally be out on the road delivering these talks in person, traveling across the UK and visiting different venues, but we're delighted to continue bringing this online roadshow to your screens at home. 326 screens, in fact, this evening. That's how many households we have signed up to watch this evening. And one of the many positives of being online is not just being able to deliver talks on a greater variety of destinations than we ever could on one evening if we were just visiting one venue, but we're also able to involve a greater variety of speakers. And tonight we have 3 of our tour leaders joining us. We have Andrew Cleave in Hampshire and Simon Tonkin and Niki Williamson in Spain. We also have staff member Dan Lay joining us for the first time tonight, along with General Manager Andy Tucker. So we're delighted to incorporate our leaders, both in the UK and overseas, into these evenings. And indeed, many viewers continue to tune in from overseas as well. We've had viewers from North America, Europe and Australia. So a very good morning or good afternoon to you if you're joining us on a different time zone. I'm very impressed for those of you joining from Australia. It's the middle of the night for you. So very well done. This is good dedication. Several people have inquired as to whether we'll be delivering further botanical presentations, and the answer is yes. Andrew will be focusing on orchids this evening, and we'll be releasing a full new schedule of talks on Friday this week, which will be advertising further botanical presentations along with other destinations as well. So please do keep an eye out on your inbox. Now, our 2021 and 2022 brochure is out now. If you're on our mailing list, you should be receiving it this week. If you haven't already, it looks like this. And this will help chase away any lockdown blues you may have, as it's full of great wildlife holidays. And we hope it gives you lots to look forward to and some inspiration. It's the perfect excuse to pop the kettle on, put your feet up and sit down and have a flick through it. If you're not on our mailing list and you'd like to receive a copy, please do just email us at info@naturetrek.co.uk and we'll be very happy to pop one in the post to you. Likewise, our website is a fantastic resource of information. It has lots of detailed itineraries on it, along with tour reports from previous holidays. So please do feel welcome to go online and have an explore there. As usual, please do ask any questions that you may have using our Q&A section at the bottom of your screens. Be it questions about the tour specifically or the destination, or even questions about how the travel industry is responding to the pandemic as a whole. We're more than happy to answer any questions you may have. That's what we're here for. And we'll type replies to you throughout the evening, but we'll also answer and read out any questions that we may have had throughout the evening at 9:05 after the last presentation. Please also feel very welcome to use the chat section, as many of you have started to do already. I'd encourage you to include all attendees when you send your messages. The default is to just send it to panelists, which you can do, of course, but it creates a nice chatty atmosphere, and you may be making a point that others might like to read. It might be useful, and it's an opportunity for you to meet your fellow nature trekkers as well. Now, for any people who are new to Zoom, don't worry, we can't see or hear you. It's only the panelists that are in the spotlight. Now, this evening, we're returning to Western Europe for our second installment of escapism and inspiration to this lovely part of the world. And last week, I highlighted that operating wildlife tours in Western Europe is our bread and butter, and the destinations featured tonight are no exception, this time focusing on Italy and Spain. So I hope you're sitting comfortably with a glass of wine or beer, and that we can all relax and enjoy the evening together. And without any further ado, I'll hand you over to my colleague Dan, who's going to take us to Sicily. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Just bear with me a moment while I share my screen. So as Sarah introduced me, my name is Dan. I'm joining you this evening from the edge of the New Forest, where I live, and this evening it's very wet and windy, but there are signs that spring's on its way, and I very much look forward to that, as I'm sure you all will. I joined Naturetrek in the middle of 2019, and in the Naturetrek office I curate the herpetology tours. So these are tours that are going around the world looking for the world's most amazing reptiles and amphibians, from poison arrow frogs in the rainforests of South America to some amazing chameleon species on 3 different continents. I also work in the operations team that look after 2 tours to Sicily. And I was one of the very fortunate ones last year to be able to do some overseas travel. And I went out on the Sicily tour that left in September. And here I am pictured on that tour with our group there. Sicily is the largest island in the Mediterranean, and its position at the sort of entrance gate to the Mediterranean Sea has made it a really important strategic position over the centuries, and that has led to a lot of invasions, and therefore it's had a kaleidoscope of cultures, and that's reflected in everything from the architecture, the art, and of course the food. It's also its separation from the mainland has led to speciation and subspeciation, which makes it a wonderful place for the naturalist. And of course, a close proximity to Africa means it's a great spot for migration. Naturetrek ran 3 tours to Sicily: the spring birding tour, which leaves in April, wildflowers in May, and the tour that I'm going to focus on tonight, which is Sicily in autumn in September. So you take a direct flight into Sicily, landing in Catania here on the eastern coast. And here we'll meet the charming and intelligent Luca, a lovely chap and a really fantastic all-round naturalist. He's interested in every aspect of natural history, and you're in absolutely brilliant hands with him there in Sicily. Just a 1-hour drive south to our accommodation in Syracuse. On the flight in, you'll have wonderful views of Mount Etna, which is the highest volcano and the most active in Europe. And just reading before this presentation, actually, that there's some small eruptions going on sort of as we speak. In Sicily, we'll be based in lovely rural accommodation, surrounded by vineyards and olive groves and fruit orchards. The volcanic ash from Mount Etna has made the soils here very fertile and productive. Of course, the food in Sicily is absolutely fantastic. I've got to confess that normally I'm a vegan at home, but I thought I can't go to Italy on my first tour and not have the wonderful cheese and fresh pasta and ice cream. So I did just take a vegetarian diet this week, and yeah, as I say, the food is absolutely wonderful, and the wine too, of course. So we tried to take a flight that will enable us to get a excursion in on the first afternoon, and here we head to Capo Muro de Porco, the snout of the pig, which you can see on this map. It's one of the more prominent peninsulas and therefore a great place to try and spot some migration. As we arrive here, there's this wonderful path which is surrounded by interesting vegetation, and we'll be searching there, and as well as overhead, of course, for any passing migrating birds. And it's not long before searching the vegetation that you can see some wonderful species, and I may be biased, but as a herpetologist, but this Italian wall lizards, which you can find in really good numbers here, just absolutely stunning animal, I think. This particular subspecies, Siculus, found in the southern part of Italy and into Sicily, is really typical of these reticulated pattern on the back, and as I say, just a really stunning animal. I was searching sort of the vegetation for migrants, and overhead we spotted a good number of the fan-tailed warblers or zitting cisticolas. And the lighthouse at the end had these wonderful Moorish geckos. So they were using the walls of the lighthouse to catch some late afternoon sun, and it's a great gecko, and you don't appreciate from a distance this wonderful tubercled skin, almost reminiscent of a crocodile, and that it actually has another name, crocodile gecko. And they're also found on our accommodation, so I was able to share with the group the experience of being able to touch these tubercles, and so it's an amazing texture, as I say, reminiscent of a crocodile. As we go down from the lighthouse and start sea watching, there's a great chance for some interesting gulls and the first terns. And here we found some lovely sandwich terns. We're really pleased to find Syracusan sea lavender still in flower, and the coastal areas supported other really interesting species like this rock samphire and this really nice fragrant Spanish oregano. When we were there, the conditions weren't ideal for migration, but this is a great spot, and in the spring you'll be able to see some amazing species like this. The collared flycatcher, red-footed falcon, and the wheatears there. In the evenings, we try and get back to the hotel just before sunset, give you a chance to freshen up and also a chance to start on the wine before dinner, and you'll have some really delicious canapes to enjoy while summarising the day and getting ready for dinner. The grounds around the accommodation, we can offer great bird watching or looking through what's been caught in an overnight moth trap. And here the group were looking at this vegetation where hosted subalpine and Sardinian warblers and lots of other species, spotless starlings you can easily see here up on the telephone wires. Another place we'll visit here on the eastern coast is Vindicary Nature Reserve. It's a lovely place with boardwalks, bird hides, and this path surrounded by lovely maritime vegetation. Great habitat for all sorts of wildlife, from invertebrates, birds, reptiles. And these pantanos hosting some excellent waders, ducks, gulls, and all sorts. And some of the highlights from our time there was these amazing sea daffodils, which were in full bloom. A good number of those too. Lovely to see those, and Adderwin's gull. And we had great birds, great views of these greater flamingos from one of the bird heights. A lovely time. And towards the end of the loop, there's this former tuna factory, Tanara, which was built in the 18th century and ceased production in 1943. And the roof has since gone, but the skeleton is left, and it's a wonderful place to take a photo and just relax and listen to the gentle rumbling of the sea nearby. Very scenic place. There's also the square nearby of the Swabian Rule, another great place to just relax and listen to the sea and take a photo, and of course a great place too for bird watching out at sea. Another excursion we'll take is to the coastal town of Marzamemi. As you can see, it's a lovely little town, and you walk along the coastal harbour there. And in normal times, of course, when we were visiting, it was very quiet because of the COVID situation around the world. But in normal times, you're able to go through the town and you can enjoy an award-winning ice cream here, and you're seeing the photo to the right. There's also some wonderful former salt pans which make for great birding too. Some of the stunning species we saw here, Kentish plover and black-winged stilt, amongst many other commoner species. On the way back to the hotel, Luca spotted some promising looking salt pans by the side of the road, and we stopped there to see what we could find. And there was some excellent birding again, little stints and snipe, and more flamingos, spoonbills. And also a real highlight for me was this amazing painted frog. So a real specialist species of this area in Sicily, and only found elsewhere natively in Sardinia. It's not a true frog, like a ranid frog. This is a really ancient family of frogs, and a lovely species to find here in Sicily. By this point, the moth trap was really productive. We were sort of getting 150 to 200 moths a night, and some really stunning species like this crimson speckled spurge hawk moth, and other hawk moths too, such as death's head and convolvulus. Lovely species. The geometrician, one of my favourites, is Eucrostes, beautiful animal. Spotted sulphur, and the day flying actually scarce crimson and gold, but it was attracted to the light, and we were able to look at these beautiful moths up close. This is a rare species in the UK. Lovely chunky velvety lappet. And the bird watching around the grounds was also really productive pre-breakfast walk. So we were able to see these wonderful golden orioles in the orchards, alpine swifts bombing overhead. And the invertebrates, wonderful too. This amazing violet dropwing. Stunning, stunning animal. And I was really, really chuffed with this, of course. One evening we got back to the hotel a little bit early, so I decided I'd go out and see if I can find any reptiles and amphibians. And I just couldn't believe my eyes when in the grounds I found this leopard snake, probably one of the most stunning species in Europe. And it's a species really elusive, and herpetologists can go seasons in the field and not find this species. So we were so lucky to see this, and it was obviously great to share this with Luca, a species he'd not seen before, and to share it with the group. It was a real treat. Another place we visit is a wonderful private reserve of Pantano, Cuba, and this is a place that was bought by a German conservation organisation, SBA, and after an investment, big investment of £5 million, €5 million, sorry, they've really reclaimed land and had litter and all sorts before. Now they've turned it into this wonderful slice of heaven where there's bird nest boxes all over the reserve, rocks left for reptiles, lizards, drinking water bodies, and the land is managed in a really sensitive way, so mown in strips, leaving great vegetation there, such as orchids and other wonderful plants. There's also some pantanos here, again great for all sorts of species. We saw pintail, avocet, spoonbill, all sorts. Really is a slice of heaven here. Despite the semi-drought, we're also able to find a wonderful plain tiger. This is a recent immigrant from Africa, a lovely species. Lang short-tailed blue, another lovely butterfly. And a wonderful hoopoe. I actually missed this bird as I was trying to get all the group on it, but I was lucky and blessed on the way back that from the vehicle I managed to spot a hoopoe showing really well. As I said, the land is managed really well and grazed by donkeys, and this is a scene from spring with these gladiolus, and you can find all sorts of wild orchids here in the spring months. At the front here, I'll introduce you to this Nino. He's the manager of the reserve, and he's an absolutely inspirational character. The land surrounding the reserves are owned by a lot of mafia, and his work here preventing hunting and other things have actually caused sort of death threats to Nino and his family. So despite this, he's relentless in his work, and really it's an amazing place. And from here you can just wonderfully watch these flamingos and other species and other butterflies all around you. It's a brilliant place. He also led us to another pantano where we were able to see some incredible species: marble duck, purple swamp hen, feeding out quite openly, which is quite unusual, ferruginous duck and Caspian terns. Even for a real avid twitcher, that's a quite enviable list there. The itinerary is flexible, so we can choose a clear day to make our ascent of Mount Etna. Park at the bottom after driving through some lovely valleys, and here you catch the cable cars up. Worth having your binoculars in hand, because species like rock bunting and rock sparrow and even Sicilian rock partridge is possible from the cart. And you complete the final 200 meter of the journey in these huge monster Mercedes 4x4s. They'll drop you at one of the flank craters of Mount Etna, where you can walk around and have stunning views from the top, and you can see that people are just dwarfed on the ridge there. And clouds did come in a bit, but it did add to the atmosphere, and we still got some really nice views from here. In the foothills of Etna, it's one of my favourite places on the tour, this wonderful area of grassland and different tree species. It wasn't long here before we found Sicilian long-tailed tit, a real speciality moth of this region. We had a real keen moffer in the group, John, and he was chuffed to see this species. It's a lovely animal. These Etna brooms were in full blossom when we were there, and they look stunning, like bright yellow clouds in the field, beautiful, with many birds feeding around, sirens and all sorts. Sicilian milkvetch was still in perfect flower when we were there. And one of my highlights of the day, maybe the whole trip, was this incredible ladybird spider, a species that I'd wanted to see since I knew they existed. As a herpetologist, I had my head down to the floor quite often, searching for, reptiles, and I spotted this red disappear underneath a piece of moss, and I thought that's not typical behaviour of a ladybird, so sort of lifted up this piece of moss, and sure enough, this wonderful male ladybird spider. One species that we had missed so far, or hadn't seen, was one of the sort of star species of the trip, the Sicilian rock partridge. And Luca, from here, Luca knew a spot where he'd heard them previously, never seen them. So we stopped here to try our luck, and sort of 10 minutes passed and we hadn't heard anything. And all of a sudden, to the left here, I heard the call of a rock partridge. And so we all had our eyes to the left there, and a bit of scanning, we couldn't see it. But then all of a sudden, one of the tall participants, Jenny, shouted partridge. So of course we all shuffled to try as quickly as we can to get up and knock where she was looking, and sure enough, we managed to get our eyes on a Sicilian rock partridge. Another place we visit is a wonderful canyon, one of the deepest in Europe, Cava Grande. En route up, there's some great places to stop, such as this wonderful vista, where you can search for migration, and the valleys are great for all sorts of wildlife. Wasn't long after we arrived when we had the first honey buzzards going over. A little bit distant and a bit fleeting, but a wonderful spectacled warbler and a copper demoiselle coming down on the railings. Just along from here, we got our first sighting of this. This is a Sicilian wall lizard, endemic to Sicily and separated from the Italian wall lizard by these dorsal lateral stripes on the side. And I saw a promising looking rock there, so I turned it over and was chuffed to find this beautiful ocellated skink, a lovely animal and another speciality of this area. Lovely chunky skink. That's one of 7 species of skink in Europe. It gives birth to live young, like many skinks, and it will have anywhere between 2 and sort of 22 live young. So here in Cava Grande, beautiful places you can see, and on the right there's a building where we're able to search down into the valley for one of the other target species. The striking blue rock thrush, actually a chat, not a true thrush, and we saw them there feeding wonderfully around the boulders. And around us we had some wonderful butterflies, sun beaming down on us and them, and the beautiful Cleopatra swallowtail, very obliging. The lovely Anne here taking a nice photo. And Luca was really happy to find the Sicilian grayling. That was on the top of his list to find. Been a while since I mentioned food, so here's the food slide. Absolutely delicious food here for lunch, and Matt in the office asked me if I ate all of this, and I had to tell him that this was my second plate. We also have time to visit Noto, the city of Noto. Beautiful place again, with this wonderful cathedral, famous cathedral. Looks amazing, and the Mediterranean blue skies behind. There's also time to walk around, get some souvenirs or have an ice cream. And of course, I'm very happy about my decision to not take a vegan diet this week, because this was the best ice cream I've ever eaten. Delicious. Another visit we make is to Peninsula Magnesi. It's not as rural as the other places we visited, but a great place for really key species. The stone curlew, which we saw here in good numbers, sort of flying up and then taking up on their normal skulking behaviour. But we've got some great views of those and lovely flowers in bloom here, the autumn squill and the infamous autumn mandrake. We take in some of the historic sites, the Neapolis here. It's a great place to see both native and sort of exotic trees and plants, and great place for birding too. These nymphiums were attracting some really nice dragonflies, stunning species like this broad scarlet, and equally wonderful southern skimmer. So I said it's time to take in some history here, and Luke will be glad to tell you everything he knows about these wonderful sites. And finally, there's time to take in the wonderful Syracuse city centre with wonderful piazzas and cathedral, and time to buy some souvenirs. Or you can just sit back and relax as Luca and I did and have an ice cream or one of these wonderful Sicilian granitas, amazingly smooth pulverized ice with delicious flavors. I hope that's whet your appetite, both for the food and the wonderful natural history of Sicily. Back over to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you very much, Dan. That was fantastic. Loved your pictures of the leopard snake. Amazing. We'll hand over now to Andrew. Andrew, you're going to take us to Gargano. So over to you.
Okay, we'll just get onto the screen, share screen. One moment. How's that?
Yep, that's brilliant.
Okay. Well, briefly about myself, I've been with Naturetrek for almost 30 years. The first trip I led was actually Galapagos, sort of baptism by fire, and did several Galapagos trips after that, and subsequently been to India and lots of places in Europe, this being one of my favorites, of course. And the Gargano is known as the orchid capital of Europe. Anyone who's fanatical about orchids just has to go there. It's also one of the most flower-filled places in Europe. So it's a real mecca for botanists. Strangely, not visited by general tourists quite so much. But to give you an idea of where it is, it's right down in the south of Italy, not as far down as Sicily, but it's the spur on the heel of Italy, the little bit that sticks out. And what we do is to fly down here to Bari and then pick up minibuses and then drive up the coast. I suppose a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours up the coast to get to the Gargano Peninsula. Really, the Gargano Peninsula is rather like an island because it's surrounded on three sides by the sea. And then on the other side, on the west side, there's sort of flat agricultural land. And so this great limestone outcrop is really cut off from other places. So effectively being an island, things are developed in their own way. And a great degree of endemism, as we call it, lots of things that are found on Gargano and not elsewhere. So we fly down to Bari, pick up the minibuses, then start driving up the coast, but we stop off on the way to look at various habitats, all sorts of places that interest botanists and birders and naturalists. These old salt pans, rather neglected bit of coastline, always good for a breath of sea air on our first day. And as well as looking down, of course, at all the interesting coastal plants, are always interesting birds there, all the usual waders and gulls you might expect, but also things like pygmy cormorant, which is a very unusual bird, and about as far west as you're likely to see these. But as well as that, things like the avocets and stilts, short-toed larks, good range of Mediterranean birds there. In fact, in the background in that picture, you can just see the hills of Gargano. Now, our destination at the start of the trip is Monte San Angelo, very historic town, very famous in Italy, site of religious tourism. It all started, I think, in about the 5th century AD, when the Archangel Michael apparently appeared there, and there are footprints in a cave. This grotto, this cave, is a place of great, important pilgrimage, and all over Monte San Angelo there are statues, pictures, drawings of the Archangel Michael. This famous castle dominates the town. And if you like swifts, this is the place to go. The uncountable numbers of swifts nest in Monte San Angelo. Our hotel is just tucked away behind the castle. And in one direction from the hotel, we can wander down into this amazing town, just what you can imagine, a real network of cobbled streets and alleyways, ancient buildings. The oldest church still in active daily use in Italy is in Monte San Angelo. And there are coffee shops and all the usual sort of things. So it's very good for a diversion. If we get back early from a day out or leaving a little bit late, wander around Monte San Angelo is quite something. And if you wander the other way from the hotel, not into the town, but out onto the hillsides, then you'll still find the little shrines and statues because of the importance of this site. Padre Pio, a priest who's greatly revered in this area, is there. And when we often go looking for a particular plant, we find ourselves peering at a little shrine. Now, going the other way from the town, away from the busy touristy place, you still find ruins, old stone walls, tumble down huts and buildings. You notice that the locals are very keen on the orchids. So you see signs like this all over the place. And there are lots of cafes, restaurants that have orchid built into their name somewhere. And people seem to know what we're there for. I did notice when I was taking this photograph, something rather colourful underneath the archway, the cocoon of a swallowtail butterfly. But here we're perched high up now. The Gargano Peninsula rises up, suppose not quite 4,000 feet above sea level. Monte San Angelo is about 2,000 feet up. And then we've got these rolling limestone hills. So a short distance from the hotel, I should think a typical Naturetrek scene, people spreading out, peering down at the ground in this case, looking for the orchids. You don't have to go very far. I think one good thing about Gargano is that more or less wherever you can pull off the road and stop the minibus, you're going to find something interesting. And sometimes driving along, people spot a car, botanists upended somewhere. We know that's a spot worth looking at. And one of the first things we find is this version of the early spider orchid. We get early spider orchids in Britain. Dorset has huge colonies of them, but this is the Gargano form. Because of the isolation of Gargano, things are developed in their own way. And so this one, Ophrys phagodes, the same species as ours, but it's passionis because of the season of Lent when it flowers, and Garganica. One problem is that the taxonomists can never make their minds up, and every year the name of something or other has been changed. The English names remain the same, thank goodness. The scientific names change, but on these open hillsides, you really can't walk very far without finding orchids and other fantastic wildflowers. So this is the normal form of the early spider orchid. This is the one that we get in Britain, not the previous one, the Gargano form. There's plenty of those to find in habitats like this. And so very typically it's like this: stone walls, rocky outcrops, little mini ravines and hollows, shepherds' huts here and there, abandoned buildings, olive trees, almond trees, a nice mixed sort of environment, and extremely good for the flowers, of course, being limestone, but also very good for other natural history. So you don't have to go far before you start spotting not just the spider orchids, the early spider, but this really beautiful one, Bertoloni's bee orchid. Can't really miss those. It's got this shiny mirror on the lip, and although it's quite a low growing plant, if you're out there on a sunny day, these little glints of light attract your attention. And Bertoloni's is a real star, and not one that occurs in Britain. But one thing about having all these orchids close together is that they hybridize. The bees will visit one and then another and a different species. So there are lots and lots of hybrids, which are good fun to try and sort out. So this is a cross between Bertoloni's and the early spider orchid. It's what we call a stable hybrid because it always stays like that. Now, you're fairly free to wander around. Some agricultural land and gardens and so on. We don't go into those, but just wandering across open hillsides, the sort of pattern of what we do. Except that I do say to people, please watch your feet. You never know what's going to be down there. Some of the orchids, when they first appear, are quite low growing. This is the late spider orchid, same species that we get in Britain. There's a very small population of these in Kent, but here there are uncountable numbers of them. And when they start, they're quite low growing, but as if we're there, go back to a site later in the week, you'll often find they've extended by quite a few centimeters. But there's also a Gargano form of this one. Well, you hardly know where to look or where to stand. We've gone about 100 meters from the minibus and made very slow, very stately progress. A sea of yellow irises there with orchids of every description all around us, and it stretches in every direction. That's just a thing. Sometimes people ask for directions to find something. Say, well, where you can pull off the road is probably as good as you need. And what we're looking at here, a whole array of lovely orchids, the sawfly orchid on the left, and no English name for this one, but Ophrys promontorii after the Gargano promontory. And quite a lot of these found only on Gargano, some occasionally elsewhere in Italy. Most of them are very scarce, which is why people are so excited about going to this area. The sawfly orchid is much more widespread. This is a great favorite with people. It's a really attractive thing. It doesn't seem to vary much or hybridize very much, so it's a good one to recognize. The lovely grassy hillsides are good exploring, and whilst we're noses down looking at the orchids, in the background there'll be searle buntings singing, or perhaps a turtle dove somewhere, or quail calling in a cultivated field. Extremely good bird watching. Even though it's not really a birdie trip, we do end up with a very good list. Just way off in the distance is a very famous site, Monte Sacro, the holy mountain. It's got a ruined monastery on the top, a shrine there, but also it's a mecca for botanists. We'll go there shortly. Depending on the season, some orchids are almost going over when we get there. We have to work a bit harder to find them. Things like the somber bee orchid. This is quite an early one. Now, Gargano, as you can see, get lovely sunny weather, blue skies. Not all the time, very occasionally. We've gone out looking for bee orchids in the snow. And sometimes there's been fog because Monte San Angelo's high up, but we just drive off and try and find a more sheltered area. One of my favorite sites is this one. This is a walk from our hotel, the Palace Hotel in Monte San Angelo, and it's called the Pilgrim's Path. And it's probably one of the most ancient pathways that any of our groups will ever walk on, because soon after the appearance of the Archangel Michael in Monte San Angelo, it became a place of great pilgrimage. And this is just about the end point of the path. Pilgrims would come from Rome, in fact, and find their way to a series of monasteries and hermitages, holy sites all the way, and end up at Monte San Angelo. That was the final destination. So we actually walk down the Pilgrim's Path. We go the wrong way, make very slow progress down this lovely path. I probably shouldn't say that, but in all the 10 years I've been taking groups there, 2 weeks at a time, I've never ever found anybody else on the Pilgrim's Path. Probably blown it now and people will go there, but it's a beautiful, easy place to walk down. And of course, all the way down there are these orchids, and because we're not on a road, there's no traffic noise, you can hear the bird song as well. Various forms of the early spider orchid, of course, get everyone very excited. I should say we have probably quite lively discussions sometimes trying to identify these things, because each year a new book comes out, new classification is decided on. People argue about the names of them, but even so, it doesn't really matter the names as long as we can find and enjoy looking at them. So our group slowly going down the Pilgrim's Path, looking at orchids all the way down, nice, safe, easy walking. And with the bank on one side, often the plants are at eye level. Very cheerful, colourful one is the yellow bee orchid. The problem is that the yellow bee orchid varies from one country to another. So people will say, well, I saw this in Portugal, didn't look like that. Then we have to remember that we're in a fairly isolated area and they take on their own form. And there's a very dark form, yellow bee orchid, and a smaller variety of it all adds to the fun. Now, this is a big area for olive cultivation, very important for the economy, apart from tourism, of course. And in the flat valley floors, there are intensively managed olive groves, but on these really steep hillsides, the olive groves have, well, these lovely stone walls that are tumbling down a little bit, and cultivation is fairly haphazard. Now, in the commercial olive groves, it's almost a scorched earth policy beneath the olive trees to make it easy to harvest them. But up here on these hillsides, there are all sorts of nooks and crannies where plants can grow. Now, the bumblebee orchid, probably the least conspicuous of all of the bee orchids. But the thing about bumblebees is that they live in swarms. And where you find one, you'll often find 50 or 100 of them. And this one is waiting for a pollinating insect to arrive. In orchids, the pollen stays in a sort of sticky mass and is carried away by an insect. So the bumblebee orchid, worth getting down hands and knees to have a look at it and looking for the swarm. But back to our olive grove, this hillside, as you can see, the little tracks and trails everywhere, and it doesn't take long for the group to disperse over the hillside. Then you hear excited shouts of, "Oh, what's this?" Or "I found a," whatever it might be. And sometimes we've come across an extremely rare plant. In fact, there are only 2 or 3 sites for this, one of which I guard very carefully, the small patterned Orchids, which is, I suppose, derived from the late spider orchid. It's extremely rare, even in Gargano, and you're probably not going to find that outside of Gargano. A tall, stately plant. It's exciting when we get to see that. I have to save that one up towards the end of the week. Sometimes people have a wander in the morning, a pre-breakfast walk, perhaps birding, close to the hotel, as this is, and then spot something exciting, and we all go off after breakfast to check it out. It could be something like the spectacled orchid or the spectacled Orchids, whose English name remains the same, but the scientific name seems to change every year. People decide which genus or species it really is. So just to give you an idea, this sort of galaxy of attractive flowers, this is just a few of them. We probably by about second day into the trip, we would have spotted all of these, and it goes on. I would think by the end of a good week in Gargano, we get about 50 species of orchids, not just bee orchids, but a good range of them. The bottom left one, for example, Orchis sipontensis, known only on Gargano and only on about 2 or 3 sites on Gargano. So it's really exciting to find that one. And this one is the Gargano form of the late spider orchid. Plenty of time to photograph things, of course. And again, a typical Naturetrek pose, kneeling on the ground, worshipping a plant, pink butterfly orchid here. It's quite a widespread plant, but really attractive. We get there in an early season, and I sometimes have to yell out to people, "Quick, look up over your head. Can you see what's flying over?" Often something like a white stork, or be golden oriole calling somewhere, or maybe a marsh harrow will fly by, or Montague's harrier even. So although it is an exceptionally good botanical site, very good for the Mediterranean birds as well. We're out on a sort of stony limestone pavement, lovely woodland stretching away in the distance, and that's a site for these two, slightly confusing at first, the Roman orchid and the elderflowered, that when you get close to have a look, you then see they are actually quite different plants. And this is thought to be a hybrid between the two, with this much darker center base to the lip. In April, we can get mixed weather, normally warm and sunny, as you've seen. Occasionally, there could be something like fog or snow or rain for a day or so. Quite often, it can be quite warm, and we have a little rest, sit down, have a bit of shade, and it's good for watching the butterflies. The British species occur there, green hair streak and the wall brown, not particularly common in Britain, but also the swallowtails, the common swallowtail and the scarce swallowtail, which is a bit scarce, so we do see it, but not as much as the common swallowtail. So if you're into butterflies, good place to go. Now the tongue orchids are a bit harder work because they seem to sort of braid into each other rather. And so you need to look quite closely at these. And in this sort of habitat, black-eared wheatear might turn up. And someone says they've seen a funny wheatear, usually one of these. And then you have to really get down and look at the tongue orchids to be sure what you're seeing. So the heart-flowered tongue orchid on the right, quite distinctive. And the one without the English name, Orientalis, another very different, much taller plant. And out on a hillside, you might find a small flowered tongue orchid, very distinctive small one. Or this lovely small flowered catchfly, Silene gallica. Now, one good thing about Gargano is, of course, that it's impossibly stony, steep hills, this limestone rock everywhere, and there's no running water, in fact, virtually no standing water. So it's difficult for farmers to plough it up or do anything much with it, which means the flowers are fully protected. And that's why all these little nooks and crannies have these fantastic displays of flowers like the sparse flowered orchid or the four-spotted orchid. They also hybridize and produce an attractive form. Sometimes you see people wearing anoraks here. It can be a cold wind from the east. So we wrap up a bit of the day, but it doesn't seem to slow the flowers down. And a very common one is the Italian man orchid, sometimes called the naked man orchid. But we also get our man orchid, the one that occurs in Britain. And they produce this fantastic hybrid, quite a scarce plant. But we do find that most years we'll find one or two plants of this one, sometimes in the absence of one of the parents. Wrapped up warm here, not looking at orchids now, of course, we've plenty of those to see, but there are lots of other nice things like this beautiful little viola, which comes in all these different color forms. And on this stony hillside, we find this lovely butterfly, southern festoon, and its food plant, the very curious birthwort, an ancient medicinal herb. They two are very closely linked. You generally don't find festoons anywhere where you're not walking around on the birthwort. Probably abandoned here, shepherd's hut. And the giant orchid, not quite, almost the largest one, probably not the most attractive, but it's another one for our list, an early one, usually the first one we spot on the trip when we stop by the coast. Giant orchid is quite a widespread one. But depending on the season, sometimes we don't get all of them on our list. So this one, the milky orchid, is a very early one, which we may see if it's a late season. And the fragrant bug orchid is a late flowering one. So if it's an early season, it comes out, we get that. So we don't always get the complete list, it just really depends a bit on the weather and where we go. But the version of the common spotted orchid, we will probably find quite easily. And there are lots of broom rapes as well, very attractive. They have orchid-like flowers, although they're not orchids, and some of them even are scented, clove-scented broom rape. If you like irises, really is the place to go. Fantastic displays of irises, hillsides absolutely covered in them, iris lutescens, and amongst the irises, things like this little sand crocus or the yellow star of Bethlehem, not quite the one we have in Britain, slightly different species. But it's an unbelievable sight when they're all out in flower. Very common, we saw a picture earlier on of people standing knee-deep in yellow versions of the same species. And hillsides covered as far as you can see with elder-flowered orchids and the green-winged, which is the same species as the one we have in Britain, but very, very common here. Doesn't seem to hybridize it very much, but plenty of opportunity for photography, as I've said. And often when we're down photographing something or other, think, oh, hello, what's this little thing? Something you hadn't really noticed, like the common grape hyacinth, Muscari neglectum. We do really neglect it until we get down and have a close look. Don't realize how many other flowers are there. I want a pre-breakfast walk again from the hotel. Someone spotted something and we went back to have a look, and the one on the left, an aberrant form of a spider orchid. But we did later find the Provence orchid, which is quite a scarce one there. So plenty of opportunities for pottering about from the hotel, finding things. And of course, every day we go out and wander and visit a different site. I mentioned endemic plants, plenty of endemic orchids, and there are lots of things with the name Garganica attached to them, like this bellflower found only here and Gargano, or this pale golden drops, the only site in the world thought to be this ravine, this gorge that we visit. It's quite close to the hotel, the pale golden drops. It just grows on very precarious cliff edges in the ravine. An irate farmer approaching us. There's a fantastic valley which is cultivated, growing wheat. But despite the fact that every year it's ploughed up and cultivated, thousands, tens of thousands of yellow tulips grow in these fields. So we stop off and have a look. Some years they're over or not quite coming out, but most years we can at least find some, sometimes a carpet of them. But of course it's a growing crop, so the farmer not too keen on us going in the field. You can see them perfectly well from the edge, but quite a sight, find those. The cultivated olive groves, you can see rather intensively managed, so not quite so exciting, but the areas surrounding them are pretty good. And once we've had our fill of the orchids, if you can ever really have your fill of the orchids, there's all the other lovely Mediterranean flora to have a look at. I mean, all sorts of composite in bright colours. This pink hawksbeard is a good one. And it's a farmed area. Of course, people live and work there. So there are cattle, there are goats or horses and piglets running around. So it's an area where people have lived and worked for a long time. Notice signs of people gradually abandoning the hillside and must say moving into the towns. There are lots of desirable properties here. And Dan was telling us about some of the reptiles in Sicily. Well, again, here, Luca, who I can highly recommend as a leader, has been with me in Gargano and have great fun there looking for the reptiles and, of course, the interesting butterflies. A nettle tree butterfly, quite an unusual one, being attacked by an ant here. By way of a contrast, this shady forest, the Foresta Umbra, is very different. A beechwood dripping in mosses and lichens, and things like this strange tree lungwort, a complete contrast to the open hillside. Vast areas of the spring cyclamen, always out when we go there, thank goodness. A very delicately scented cyclamen. And woods filled with peonies. This is a woodland which is actually a sweet chestnut coppice. You can see the trees have been, or pollarded rather, and these beautiful peonies, always in flower at the time of year we go there. Sometimes whole copses full of them. You don't have to worry too much. The cattle are fairly docile and you can hear them coming anyway because of the bells. And the grazing seems to actually improve things. So the woodlands, when we wander into them, normally full of interesting plants like these anemones. In fact, wolves have been reintroduced into the Gargano woodlands, although we haven't yet seen a wolf there. We have seen signs. And if you're interested in fungi, morels come out in the spring. Occasionally we found this, the red cage fungus, Clathrus ruber, and sometimes carpets of earth stars as well. Usually there are people out collecting the morels if it's a good season for them. And entomologists interested in insects of every description. Minstrel bugs are quite eye-catching. And the false tooth plant, Odilium apulus, looking like two sets of false teeth. Interesting one. But sometimes we peer down at the ground looking for the tiniest plants. Botanists often more excited the smaller something is. For this dense flowered orchid, a real prize if you can find it, quite a scarce one. The other extreme, the lady orchid, you just can't believe the size, the spectacle of these, and wandering into an olive grove where there may be over 100 of these magnificent plants in flower is quite something to see. So as you can see, the orchids range from tiny to enormous, from obscure to dazzling. We end up from the trip, the last few days, staying here by the sea at Peschici, staying with some seabirds around us, like the yellow-legged gull. And we stay here in this little hotel, the Hotel Elisa, right down on the harbour. Fantastic place. The cliffs all around covered in interesting plants. And the blue rock thrush, Dan mentioned, lives here in amongst the town. In fact, it seems to perch on people's balconies. Scarce bird. And there's a big colony of alpine swifts nesting in the cliffs, the rondinis, as they call them. So we get entertained in the evenings by the lovely calls of the swifts as they come in to roost. Mediterranean gull there, traditional fishing, providing our meal for the next night, and slender-billed gull as well in this little harbour. So birders need not feel left out. But back out onto the hillsides from Peschici, still more butterflies to see, things like the wood white and the eastern dappled white, looking a bit like an orange tip, but not quite. With an amazing display of orchids and other flowers to see, but also quite interesting is that there are a lot of very rare British native plants, which I like to point out to people. In fact, 2 for the price of 1 here. Ground pine, just about in Hampshire, I think might still be just hanging on. The very rare, what once was described as a cornfield weed, really common here. And just I've forgotten, this was in the picture, white rock rose, grows at about 3 sites in Britain. So plenty to keep you occupied the whole time. You really have tired of all the orchids down at your feet, and there are tiny little plants like this little evax, which has no common name, but there isn't really a square inch that isn't covered with something interesting. And not to be outdone by Dan, we better have a picnic, of course. My first job in the morning normally is to nip down to the supermarket and get stocked up with all these fantastic foods and wonderful bread, and the fruit and vegetables are always perfectly ripe. Lots of delicious local cheeses as well. So nobody goes hungry. And of course, the wine in this region is excellent as well. Usually the trips there coincide with my birthday. So sometimes someone takes a birthday photograph of me here, kneeling down, surrounded by orchids. What could be nicer? Early purples, green-winged orchids and Roman orchids here. So you can see a fantastic destination. If you're interested in plants and orchids particularly, I hope I've whetted your appetite for Gargano. Thank you very much for looking in tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was fantastic. Some lovely armchair travel there. I hope you all enjoyed that at home. Apologies, we are running over by 15 minutes, but I hope you're all enjoying it so much that you don't mind. We will just go to a 5-minute break now. So you've got an opportunity to go and top up your drink, and we'll be back here at 8:35 where we will hand over to Simon and Niki. And for our interval, I'll play you some traditional Italian music on the Venetian lute, which I hope you enjoy. We'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Right, well, welcome back everybody. After a short break, I hope you've had an opportunity to go and top up your drinks. We're now going to go to Simon and Niki, who are joining us from Spain. Simon and Niki, we are running a few minutes late, but don't worry, still do your full presentation. Take us to 5 to 9, and then Andy can take us to 9:15, and hopefully people don't mind hanging on for 10 minutes extra. So please do introduce ourselves and take it away.
Okay, well, first off, let's try the technology. Let's see how the rehearsal shaped up. Hopefully this works. I had a nightmare doing this earlier, actually. I lost the presentation. Now I found it again, so no worries.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So, yeah, pleased with that. So I'm Simon Tonkin, and you probably guessed.
I'm Niki Williamson. Hi, everybody.
And we're live from the very epicenter of migration here in the Straits of Gibraltar, southern Spain, Andalucia. And this is a real whistle-stop tour of all of the tours we do from this base. But it's a magical place. If you've not been, you have to come. And if you've been, you have to come again, because we love showing you it. So, because it's our deep passion. We love migration, but there's so much to see here. So this is where our house is. That big blue dot is hovering over our house. Our house is a lot smaller than that on the map, obviously. But this is a really narrow point between Europe and Africa. Only 14 kilometers separate the two continents. And that gives rise to some magical wildlife experiences. And it's also got some of the biggest protected area network in the whole of Europe as well as the whole of Spain. The Parque Natural Los Alcornocales and the Straits Natural Park itself as well, which is a stunning place to visit for anybody who loves to see a myriad of different birds. And this is our friend Marina. Here you always look up, because there's always something to see. The skies are full. And some people say to me, well, when's the best time to come and see the migration? It's almost constant. So the spring migration has already started. It actually starts even as early as November, mostly in December. The first white storks are coming back now. And into January, February, more and more white storks and the first black kites. Actually, today we had the first black kites coming back already, making their way back to their breeding sites from the sub-Saharan African wintering grounds. So we run a number of tours here, and you can take your pick really, whether it's the whales, dolphins and the autumn migration. Go slow in Andalusia is brilliant, because you can sit in a deck chair and just watch visible migration, or if you've not got that much time, a swift weekender, seeing 5 species of swift and all of these other fabulous breeding birds that we have here in Andalusia, like the rufous-tailed bush robin, or marble ducks, white-headed ducks, red-knobbed coots, which has become my friend in lockdown, which is one just down the road here, and Rhondda in the Straits as well, which is actually mostly focused on the griffon vulture migration. The only place to see that is here in the Straits of Gibraltar, but we also go up to the mountains as well. And of course, not forgetting one of my favorite trips, and Paul and Jenny just give me a nudge on this, actually, the birding on 2 continents. And we at Naturetrek actually pioneered this approach to actually spend half our time in the southern part of the Straits in Spain, but also go over to the other side, which gives rise to really different species to see, and different cultures, different food, and different people, of course. So one of the great things I'm really looking forward to, and which has been a real lifesaver in these times of lockdown, is being able to look out up, whether that be from my bedroom window, the living room window, or just getting down nearby here on the coast and seeing these birds crossing. And as I say, I can't stress enough how narrow this point is, just 14 kilometers. This is just down the road from us here, looking across the Jebel Musa, that big rock promontory, which is one of the other pillars of Hercules in the Straits of Gibraltar. The other one on the European side is actually Gibraltar, or Gibraltar, if you prefer. So it's really narrow point, but this is one of the most treacherous parts of soaring birds' migratory journey. And that's because there are crosswinds and all sorts of other things to deal with. But of course, when they're crossing over the sea, there are no thermals to give them the lift that they need to battle across this barrier of sea. So they rise up as high as they can, and then they drift out, and hopefully they get enough height on the thermals on the land to carry them across. Invariably, it's not enough, and they have to power fly a little bit of the way. If they've got good conditions, they don't have to do that too much. If there are bad conditions and time's going on, birds get more and more desperate, particularly in the autumn when young birds are making the crossing for the first time, and some of them actually fall into the sea and die, which is a real shame. So it's better than EastEnders or any other soap opera that you might watch. Here's Niki with a 14-kilometer t-shirt on, stressing the point. This is at a place called Punta Carnero. And this is in spring, actually. Watching the birds coming in the spring is really great, because you're seeing them really exhausted, but head on, and huge numbers of different eagles, kites, storks, black and white storks, and also small birds like Spanish sparrows as well. For instance, they're actually crossing over into Morocco or coming back into Europe. So that's really cool too. And of course, we actually spend a lot of our time sitting in a deck chair, which is no bad thing. It's one of my favorite things to do, with a pair of binoculars and a clicker. So here we are with our friends at Fundación Migres, who we actually do some voluntary work for. We work with them when we're not guiding, actually monitoring the migration. And here it's possible to count all of the birds coming through. So whether it's griffon vultures on their sabbaticals, not really a migration, but we'll talk about that in a moment, or honey buzzards in huge numbers, or black kites. And black kites are really interesting to me, because here in the Straits, we count 140% of the Western European breeding population. And you're probably thinking, this guy doesn't know maths at all. What the hell is he talking about? Well, that's because we count more than the surveys and the estimation on the breeding sites is. So it's really good that we're doing this count work, because we actually understand the population changes, and also the shifts in migration as well, which is really important with climatical change and other habitat issues as well. And we love showing you this. So the best thing to do is come with us and have a picnic and watch raptors.
Yeah, we thought we'd get in early with our obligatory picnic slide. Obviously, when there's so much amazing stuff going on overhead, you've got to make a bit of time to sit down in the shade and just recharge the energy levels and stuff. So great way to do that is have a picnic out in the field, then you don't even miss anything that's going on overhead. We're blessed in this area with just fantastic fresh local produce, so we always make sure that we feature that. So just a huge range of stuff to suit any dietary requirement, really. The fresh fruit and vegetables are astounding. Local organic wines, what else? Fresh bread every day, great olives, and the cheeses. Oh my God, the cheeses. The goat's cheese and the sheep's cheese in this area are world beaters. They win awards every year, so you can be pretty sure that you won't go hungry during the day, certainly. And then that theme's kind of continued at our accommodation. This is the Catherine and her lovely team of people at Huerta Grande Rural Eco Lodge, which is the place that hosts our trips in the Straits. And they too, they're really good at knocking out just fantastic, really authentic Andalus food. And we worked with them for many years, so they're really good at adapting to individual needs as well within that. The accommodation's set within 7 acres of wooded grounds right on the edge of Los Alcornocales Natural Park, which is the largest cork oak forest in Europe. So at the end of the day, you can relax in the shade and be surrounded by things like short-toed tree creepers and crested tit and hawfinch, and hopefully maybe have a nice encounter with the resident tawny owl as well. So that's always nice.
So one of the great things about being here in the Straits of Gibraltar, this real epicenter of migration, is the proximity to the raptors and other soaring birds as well. So it's great for photographic opportunities, either time of the season, either whether it's in the spring with them coming in or whether they're leaving in the autumn. But everything is really determined by the wind here. Normally we have either the poniente wind, which is from the west, the cool fresh air coming off the Atlantic, or the levante wind, the humid air coming from the Mediterranean. And this actually, particularly the levante winds, actually stops a lot of the birds crossing. Birds like this larger eagle, like the short-toed eagle, they really do struggle across the sea, so they have to wait for pretty good conditions. And that's one of the great things about the Straits of Gibraltar, because you get to the point where these birds are massing up because of this wind, and you get these huge concentrations. And you don't get that anywhere else in any other bottleneck of migratory passage anywhere else in the world. And of course, what happens then is you get these migratory or what we call flyaway bullies. And this is a young Bonelli's eagle that we were watching last autumn. Yeah. And this guy was going after booted eagles, even had a go at short-toed eagles. They actually will take and eat migratory raptors, even storks. And this guy's got an average wing span of about 1.5 meters, but they are rock solid. They are really hard, and they take on crazy prey. Actually, a friend of mine was watching the migration, and she saw a black stork being taken out by a Bonelli's eagle. Quite extraordinary. We've seen them taking out honey buzzards. We actually were with a group a couple of years ago, and we actually were watching this migratory flow going over, marsh harriers piling through, and one of the marsh harriers got in a bit of a tussle with the Bonelli's eagle, and we were rained on by marsh harrier feathers. Everybody was gasping and screaming, and it was quite something to see. We've put together a couple of videos. You'll hear a bit of the wind in these videos because it gives you a sense of the place and time and everything else. But this is what we call a Milanada. It's a kite fest, and it's possible to see 10,000 black kites in one area like this. This is just down the road from us, just near Tarifa. And you see these birds can't cross, or they're waiting to cross and gathering height. And these guys are actually going into the headwinds just to get some height. It's one of their favorite valleys to hang out in before crossing. And this video doesn't really do it justice because the sky is absolutely thick with black kites. And then, of course, later on in the day, here with our friends Pepe and Teresa, later on in the day, normally about 10:30, you can pretty much set your watch by this. The white storks come, and they come in big groups, maybe 700 to over 1,000 birds. And if they're coming low like this, it's spectacular. It's one of the most amazing things to see. And we never bore of this, and we never bore of showing people it. It's phenomenal. And just to see swirling masses of birds and how they interact as well. So each bird in this group is telling the group what's happening in the thermals. They're like a big sensory array all together, working to find out the best thermals before making the crossing. And here, right now, at that point, they're starting to cross. They've soared up and they're actually going out into the Straits and onto Morocco and down to sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, there are lots of other birds, not just soaring birds that are coming through. And I couldn't do a presentation about southern Spain without putting in bee-eaters, European bee-eaters. Everybody loves European bee-eaters. And it's great to see one European bee-eater, but to see literally thousands of them quipping and calling and coming through at literally ankle level. You'll be watching raptors and suddenly a group of bee-eaters have come through your legs. That's just phenomenal. And actually, this is our neighbour. And this is a photo I took during the first lockdown in autumn here. Was it autumn or spring? I'm not sure. Spring, yes. Yeah, these birds were roosting on the edge of the village before going out to the Straits the next day, or perhaps overnight, as some of them do cross overnight.
Cool. And it just carried on and on, really, as the season wears on into October, November. The kites and eagles have started to dip, but then along come the Eurasian griffon vultures. It was just a spectacular migration to be part of. Europe's griffon vultures, when they leave the nest, they all the young ones head to Africa for their first couple of years to come of age, I suppose, like any good teenager should. And of course, they all pass through here. Thousands upon thousands of them pass through the Straits of Gibraltar across this narrow stretch of sea. And it's just a phenomenal thing to be amongst. We've had days where we've seen 3,000 birds attempt the crossing in a single day. And if you bear in mind that each of them weighs somewhere in the region of 10 kilograms, you're talking about literally tons of airborne biomass just swirling around your head before they make their way over and across to winter in Africa. It's just stupendous, indescribable to be part of that, really. Coming through here, we also have gorgeous Egyptian vultures, about 2,500 in the autumn pass through here. They're doing much better in Spain now, thanks to ongoing conservation efforts. And we actually have around 6 pairs nesting in the Straits area too. So really good chance of seeing this distinctive vulture with that gorgeous kind of egg yolk yellow face. Really, really cool. Another oddity of the area is this Rupel's vulture, which is kind of more of an African vagrant. They're an African species, but they seem to be turning up here more and more. So what seems to be happening is they encounter and interact with the young griffon vultures in their wintering grounds in Africa, and then somehow get caught up with the excitement of the northerly migration. And we end up with a good handful of them end up in Spain every year, maybe half a dozen, 10, something like that. And of course, the Straits is their first port of call. So a really good chance of seeing this incredibly rare sighting in Europe now. And in fact, there's been a couple of breeding attempts here in the last couple of years, although they've been attempting to breed with griffon vultures. So it's not gone that well so far, but time will perhaps tell. The future of the Rupel's vulture in Europe begins here, who knows. This time of year, end of autumn, also a great time to head up into the mountains of the Serranía de Ronda, which is just down the road for us, really. Great to tack that on to the end of a Straits trip. Mountain birds are starting to come down from higher altitude, so it's a really nice place to see things like black wheatear, blue rock thrush, and some really cool mammals too, like Spanish ibex. And we stay in this really quirky little blue village called Huzcar. And seeing as great food seems to be an ongoing theme, it would be remiss of me not to mention that in Hotel Bandolera, where we stay, the chef Ivan is cordon bleu trained and is actually gaining fame in Spain nationally for the delights that he produces with local ingredients like chestnuts and mushrooms and cherries and things. So another trip that you won't necessarily lose weight on. Lots more local colourful characters in the Straits as well, like these just brilliant northern bald ibis. They were reintroduced here in 2008. The population is doing really well. The colonies are spreading out. We can now watch these just at the side of the road and enjoy just spending great time with these just fantastic, charismatic birds. And if we search and watch really carefully and quietly, we're very often lucky enough to spot one of these stunning little redneck nightjars in the autumn, just taking a little snooze in the shade.
So we've talked a lot about birds. I'm going to talk a bit more about birds, but about the sea and how that's a really important habitat here as well and a great place to explore. So firstly, about the seabirds, we have all of the Balearic shearwaters cross through this point at the Straits of Gibraltar. We actually monitor them here to understand what the population is actually doing. It's a really good place to monitor them. And but other species like Corey's shearwater, or the Scopoles shearwater, which is recently split and is quite confusing, but I'll not go into the identification of it, but it's really cool to actually see both here in the Straits. But cetaceans, the upwellings of both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, the meeting of those two currents gives these upwellings of nutrients, and in turn that brings in different fish species like the flying fish, the Mediterranean flying fish, tuna to eat them, and then the cetaceans as well. So striped, common, and dolphins and bottlenose dolphins are all resident, along with long fin pilot whales, but also migratory species like this fin whale, which is possible to see on a number of the trips here, or if we're very lucky, orchids. I'm always on the wrong one when I'm videoing them. Always the other one's coming up first. Insects, we have a great array of different moths and butterflies here. Actually, recently, in the last 2 months ago, there was a second for Europe found here in a moth trap by a friend of ours, which is normally in the deserts of Morocco in the Sahara area. This is one of the most stunning butterflies. It's the two-tailed pasha. It's actually Europe's biggest butterfly. And that's actually in the grounds at Puerto Grande. You can see it flying around the strawberry trees, but often when there's water around, they come to that as well. On our Swift weekender, a very short trip, but I love this trip because you see all of the Andalusian specialities in terms of the avian world. So whether it's marble ducks, red-knobbed coots, rufous-tailed bush robins, but 5 different species of swift. This one's a little swift at a known colony that we go to, and it's great to see these guys busily feeding young or just flying around, and just flying around your head as well. And then the Birding 2 Continents tour, this is mad because just 14 kilometers away, there are vast differences like the African chaffinch here or African blue tit, which look really different as well. But of course, one of the specialities that we really want to see on the marshes that are really threatened there, and we're trying to work with the locals there to try and reverse this situation, but it's the Moroccan marsh owl, the Moroccan subspecies of marsh owl. And we actually time the visit there to coincide with winter roosting or early winter roosting. It's possible to see many different individuals, but a stunning, stunning owl. And of course, when we wander up into the mountains of the Rif Mountains, it's possible to encounter, well, I'm sure you will encounter Mousier's redstarts, one of the most crazy looking things. They're so gaudy, but they're really quite aggressive as well. Between the males in the spring, they fight and sing, so they can be quite easy to locate. And of course, the blue pearl of Morocco, this is Chefchaouen, and I can never take a photo that does it justice, but I know people who are listening tonight who've been to Chefchaouen, and I know they will wax lyrical about the blue streets and the blue walls, the blue buildings. It's like being on another planet. It's like being in a Star Wars episode or something. So that's our whistle-stop tour of the Straits and beyond, this epicenter of migration, where hundreds of thousands, over 250,000 soaring birds are crossing, but also a vast array of different things, whether it's smaller birds like the bee eaters or cetaceans or butterflies and moths. It's a great place to be. And well, we're really looking forward to getting back to some form of normality and welcoming you here. If you've been here before, come back. And if you've not been, come. We want to show you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Simon and Niki. That was fantastic. Brilliant photos there. I love the videos as well that you showed. Just incredible. I love the phrase that you used, Niki, of tons of airborne biomass. That's not a phrase I've heard before used in reference to that. But no, that was brilliant. And I don't know about anyone else, but I'm feeling extremely hungry now with all of these continued images of picnics, but hopefully you're all sitting comfortably in close proximity to snacks and food for our final speaker this evening, Andy, who's going to talk about the rest of Spain. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, folks. It's wonderful, Nikki and Simon, and you to Andrew and Dan, early to see you bring those tips to life there. I've been at Naturetrek a long time now, since 1998, and I'm general manager, but operationally I still look after a huge array of tours in Western Europe. So I actually work very closely with Andrew on the Gargano and Niki and Simon with all of their trips. And one of the reoccurring themes through this presentation series is the passion and knowledge that our tour leaders bring to these tours. And I think you can see tonight that knowledge is not in short supply, but also passion for their subjects as well. And I think it's important on a lot of tours, leaders work together as in a partnership. Each brings different skills to the table. And certainly you can see the chemistry there between Simon and Niki. Just the tour's a lot of fun. That's what these holidays are all about, not just British scientific expeditions to tick off a load of species. We're there to enjoy the weather, the sun, some great wildlife, and camaraderie together. So yeah, fantastic to see. Thanks, folks. Well, I've given myself a big bite to digest tonight. I've asked myself to cover whole of the rest of Spain in 20 minutes, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that. Well, I do, because I've had a think about it and how I'm going to approach it. But what I'd like to do is to take you to two kind of lesser known areas of Spain and one better known area. We'll start off just in the foothills of the Pyrenees. If you can see those blue circles up towards the top of my screen there, the upper oval shape covers an area of pre-Pyrenean foothills called the Sierra de Guara. And then just south of Zaragoza, this blue circle here is the huge lake of Gallocanta. And one or two of you have commented in the chat that you've been on this tour with Niki. Incidentally, when we're talking, we can't see the chat. We can only see the chat once we finish talking, but don't underestimate what all of your kind comments mean to the speakers tonight. I know that Niki and Simon right now will be trolling through the chat that you've left there, the comments, both those of you that have been with them and those of you that have got trips lined up and are looking forward to going. I think there's a few of us tonight who wouldn't mind swapping places for a few days and having some of that Andalusian sunshine on our backs and those wonderful birds flying overhead, and they can come and sit in our dreary houses in the UK. So you've got a few jealous onlookers tonight, Niki and Simon. So let's start off up in the Sierra de Guara. This is our base. We do two tours here, one in May called the Sierra de Guara, Land of the Lammergeier. It's a fantastic tour for raptors, but also for plants and butterflies as well. And then we do a winter tour here each February and October called Wall Creepers and Cranes. In the winter, the wall creepers come out to the Pyrenees and will alight on down walls and church spires in these pre-Pyrenean villages. So two fantastic times of year to come and stay here in Alcázar. The Sierra de Guara is actually better known for its canyoneering possibilities. If you glance to the top of the slide there, you'll see some crazy chap jumping off a broken bridge with his partner in that clear flowing, very deep water pool below. So this is a sport that was pioneered by the French, and the Sierra de Guara is the world capital of canyoneering. Don't worry, we don't undertake anything quite so crazy on the Naturetrek tour, but the Sierra de Guara is one of the great raptor hotspots in Spain. Niki and Simon have told you that you get wonderful views of these birds, griffon vultures, down in the Strait of Gibraltar. But up here in the Sierra de Guara, we go to a vulture feeding station where we really do get eye-to-eye views of these magnificent raptors. We work closely here with a long-standing friend and colleague, Manu Aguilera. He really is Mr. Vulture in Spain. And as you're probably all aware, vultures have really struggled over the past century with dwindling numbers, mostly to do with poison, unfortunately, poison carcasses, and also to a lesser extent, wind turbines. But vulture numbers are coming back in Spain. And Manu is a great chap. We spend a morning with him in a small village called Santa Cilia. We pay him a fee and he collects a load of bones from a local butcher. And then we follow Manu up in his Land Rover up to this area of exposed limestone overlooking the Great Plains of Navarra and Aragon and Rioja. And the birds actually recognize the paint on the top of Manu's Land Rover. So as soon as he starts off from the village, they come down and land in great numbers. And Manu literally just tips the sack of bones out onto the rock, and the birds have their daily feast. How's that for an office there? And we, as clients, have just very close views, eye-to-eye views of these magnificent birds. I've seen lammergeiers throughout Europe, but I think in my experience, the best place to see lammergeier is in the Sierra de Guara. When I first went to spend some time with Manu, a lammergeier came up the valley and whizzed over the top of Manu's Land Rover, almost taking the cap off my head. You could feel the wind in your face as the bird swoops over. If you ever see one of these birds with a golden eagle up in the Pyrenees or the Alps or the Picos de Europa, then you really do appreciate its enormous size. They do dwarf even golden eagles. Fantastic eye-to-eye views of these birds as they drift past. I love the Spanish name of this bird, Cabrento Huesos, literally bone breaker. And I detest, I'm afraid, that the new English name, bearded vulture. I prefer to stick with lammergeier. Call me old-fashioned, perhaps. So the Sierra de Guara combines really well with that large lake that I mentioned, the other side of Gaia Canta. This is a seasonally flooded lake, and common cranes will rest here, both in October and February. They breed, of course, up in Siberia and Russia, but they do winter in great numbers down in the plains of Extremadura. So once they've committed to the arduous pass over the Pyrenees, they will alight in the region of Gaia Canta, take on fuel and rest before continuing down to Extremadura, and then the reverse migration back in the late autumn, around about October time. And it's really evocative, this is, spending time with the cranes in this picturesque environment. The winter time on those plains, one day we can be in shirts and t-shirts and shorts, another day wrapped up in quite windy and cold conditions. So need to be prepared for a bit of everything. But seeing the cranes leave the lake in the morning and come back to roost at dusk as they go off and feed in the stubble around to the south of Zaragoza is a fantastic sight. One year we even had an unexpected snowfall overnight, and it was a very special experience to see the cranes in the snow around the lake early the next morning. But more typically, we'll get some really nice clear sunsets and great light for photography to enjoy this spectacle. So if you fancy wrapping up wall creepers, cranes, griffon vultures and lammergeiers into the same tour, that wall creepers and cranes tour is a great one to go for. I'm going to move north now, and I'm not going to cover the Picos de Europa, which really is the northern edge of this blue circle, because I've asked Andrew Cleave to cover that in a new talk we'll be doing in February. But what I do want to focus on is this really undervisited area of the Palencian Mountains, La Montaña Palentina, just south, well, it's sandwiched really between the Picos de Europa and Spain's great cereal belt around Burgos here in the north of Castile and Leon. And what you find here is a wonderful base tucked away in one of these hamlets. As Andrew said about Italy, lots of Western Europe, Spain and Italy and France has undergone urban migration. So lots of these small rural villages, these days you might find 4 or 5 80-year-olds in flat caps and blue overalls and not many other people. They just have been abandoned as the young and families search for work in the cities. But we've teamed up with a husband and wife team here, Tino Garcia and his wife Rosa, and they've converted these 3 lovely old terrace cottages. One cottage has 3 bedrooms, all with private bathrooms, and the other 2 cottages are self-contained units. Tino puts breakfast in the kitchen for you, so you get up and make your own breakfast. We convene in the largest lounge for supper each evening, cooked by Rosa. And basically each day in June on a birds, mammals and butterfly holiday, and in the winter time or wolf watching excursions, we head out into the mountains in Tino and his friends' 4-wheel drive Land Rovers, and we just enjoy this pristine, empty wilderness. Here is Tino on the left, a great friend of mine. He doesn't speak really any English at all, which makes him ideal host for our Learning Spanish in Rural Spain trip in September. Here he is talking to one of our groups. So if you have holiday Spanish or you remember some Spanish from school and want to practice or brush up, Learning Spanish holiday is a really great, unique option. But what a personality. he's a kind of guy that even if he doesn't really speak any English at all, just because of his mannerisms and enthusiasm, hand movements, you kind of follow what he's saying. He's a tremendously charismatic chap, and nobody in Europe is more passionate about the future of the Iberian wolf and the Cantabrian brown bear. And it's a privilege to spend a few days in his company. The Montagna Palentina offers us, as I say, a vast open playground devoid of people, wilderness habitats, open mountainsides, vast beech forests in the top right there. And each day just, we go out and scan if we're on a wolf or bear watching mission, or we gently bottomize, do some bird watching walks. And it's just a wonderful place to explore, either in summer or, as I say, if you're keen on the mammals, later on in autumn and the winter. Get some great characters in these rural communities. This sign means, if you think you can cross my farm in 8 minutes, my bull Brinko does it in 4. And we've become great friends over the years with Kiko and Lana, as they allow us access onto their rural Astoria farm to scan for bears as they scavenge for fallen fruits in the early autumn. When I was first sent to Spain back in 1999, during my first full year at Naturetrek, I just recently returned from Latin America and had a year each in Peru and Ecuador. So I was quite proud of my Spanish at that point. I thought to myself, well, I've parked my hire car up, checked into the hotel, I'll just nip into the local bar and enjoy a cider with the locals. And I rather had a bit of a shock because I barely understood a single word of what they were saying, such as the difference in Spanish between rural northern Spain and Latin America. But I have improved my Castilian or Asturian Spanish over the years. And they're great people, these rural communities, farmers, very proud of their heritage. And they've got used to ecotourism and the benefits that brings in recent years as well, which is great to see. As I say, fantastic landscapes. If this was Snowdonia or the Lake District, you'd get a huge corridor of coloured cagoules and rucksacks going up that ridge there. But here, in the course of a couple of weeks, we just won't see another soul. Wolf watching particularly is a pursuit which requires abundant patience. It also requires us to wrap up warm. It can be decidedly chilly up here, and it can be a waiting game. But we are aware we're looking for one of Europe's rarest carnivores. Wolves have been persecuted in Spain for decades. Their population reached an all-time low in the mid-1970s, heavily persecuted and much maligned. But the numbers have bounced back in recent years. And wolf tourism now is an important contributory factor to the economies in these rural communities. So telescopes to the fore, plenty of warm clothing. While we're scanning for the wolves, we will be enjoying the bird life. Walks through the beech forest will provide views of black woodpecker, red deer, one of the main prey items of the wolf. The wild boar, pretty common around this area, jabalí in Spanish, where we're scanning for these animals as well. And it's also, we've come to learn with Tino's expert guidance that it's also a fantastic place to see wildcat. In Britain, of course, localised and highly threatened now up in the remote western reaches of Scotland. Hybridisation being a major threat, but actually on the continent, wildcats are quite widespread, if seldom seen, just because people don't go out looking for them. But in Montagna Palentina, we have a great chance of seeing wildcat. These images were taken by another Naturetrek tour leader, Javi Eloriega, as he co-led our wolf watching tour in 2019 with Tino. This is an Iberian wolf. This is a captive animal, a photo taken at the recovery centre in Portugal. I've just included it to illustrate the animal we're looking for here. We won't get, of course, anywhere near this close in the wild, but it's slightly smaller and more slender than the grey wolf. And the key diagnostic really is that lovely rusty coloured coat. They are gorgeous animals. A typical view on a wolf watching holiday, to be honest, is a success even if we see a wolf, and we do stress that message through these wolf watching holidays to see this apex carnivore and predator at all is a miracle. If you think how many are left in Spain and the level of persecution these wolves have endured over the past 100 years or so, it's a miracle we get a sighting at all. That's maybe a typical view, 200 or 300 meters away through a telescope, but on a red letter day, We have had views like this with an alpha male strolling into the meadow in the valley just below where we're sitting with our early morning coffee. A real thrill. Right, to finish off the evening, and I do apologise for a few minutes over, I'm going to take you to the location worldwide where Naturetrek sends more clients than anywhere else. And I'm talking about the fantastic region of Extremadura here, over towards the west of Spain, near the Portuguese border. One of the iconic birding destinations in Western Europe, and one where, as I say, we send more clients than anywhere else in any year. Now, Extremadura is best known for from a birding perspective for its steppe habitats, its rolling grasslands, the kind of which have been lost to mass scale agriculture in most of the rest of Western Europe. But these are just some typical scenes. These rolling grasslands are interspersed with cork oak forest or dehaza. You can see maybe there on the slide just where the cork has been harvested there for the traditional corks for wine bottles. One of the threats to the dehaza of the past 20, 30 years has been the advent of synthetic corks. So if you can, just spare a thought for this traditional agriculture and steer clear of silicon corks if at all possible. Roaming around the Dehazan countryside are these big fat Iberian pigs gorging themselves on acorns. And being Extremadura, I'm sorry that food is a reoccurring theme this evening. So wonderful charcuterie in central Spain, washed down with unbelievably high quality smooth red wines for a fraction of the price that you would pay here in the UK. And as Simon and Dan and Andrew have said, as tour leaders, when we're in Europe, I don't know whether being a naturalist goes hand in hand with being a foodie. I wouldn't claim to be a foodie by any stretch of the imagination. But when I'm on a tour like this, I just love going into local markets and farmer shops and stocking up on tasty local ingredients and laying those out on the picnic table, be it melt in the mouth ham or the best of the local cheeses and wine, fresh cherries, yogurts, salads. It's just a lovely way to spend some time in the middle of the day. Now, most birding tours, including ours, will use Trujillo as a hub, although we actually stay in a rural guest house a few kilometers outside the town. But on several occasions during the week, we will go into the Plaza Mayor in central Trujillo and enjoy a beer or a coffee or a glass of wine and watch the world go by. It's a historic place. This statue here, which hopefully you can pick out, is Francisco Pizarro, one of the conquistadors. Pizarro was born in Trujillo in the mid-1470s. He set sail for the New World. He was actually born into a very poor family, Pizarro. So he took a gamble and set sail for the New World in 1509. Nowadays, he's best known as being the conquistador of Peru. He overthrew the Incan warrior Atahualpa in 1533, then marched on and conquered Cusco and founded Lima, Peru, the present capital, in 1535. And it just strikes me when I'm sat down in this plaza in Trujillo that I don't think the town has changed too much visually, apart from those cars there and streetlights, etc. From Pizarro's day. I mean, the buildings are 500 or 600 years old. And that tale of the New World conquest is mind-boggling if you think about Pizarro and his humble beginnings, setting sail across the Atlantic on an old wooden galleon. And sitting here in Trujillo, you really do sense the heavy history of the place. And we will just focus on that for a few minutes during the course of a birding tour. Wheeling around a church spire in Trujillo, lesser kestrels, look familiar and similar to our common kestrels here in the UK, but lacking the black spots on the back there. A short distance to the north, half an hour's drive north, we come to Monfragüe National Park, which features in all of our Extremaduran itineraries. This is one of the most famous viewpoints. In fact, the birders tend to congregate behind this rock here. And then at the early morning, you scan across to Peña Falcón, where griffons will have roosted on that cliff face overnight, and we can see them take off in the morning. Along the edge of the reservoir here, we will see black wheatear and also black stork as well. Monfragüe is also very well known for its Spanish imperial eagle, magnificent raptor, known for the telltale diagnostics here, the so-called leading or landing lights on the Strait wing. But for me, the steppes and grasslands is what makes Extremadura so special. So we'll be out most days exploring the steppes, looking for species like little owl, this heavy dumpy lark, the calandra lark. Great spotted cuckoos are an early migrant. They'll be in Extremadura, having arrived from Africa by probably late March. And then some of the real Mediterranean Extremaduran specialities, things like pin-tailed sandgrouse, the hoopoe, which Dan touched on earlier in Sicily, the roller, which always draws oohs and ahs of appreciation. But as I say, it's the grasslands and steppes of Extremadura which are probably most people's highlight. And at least on 2 mornings of any given tour, we will kick you out of bed nice and early and be out on the steppes at dawn in an effort to see arguably the 2-star species, the little bustard and Europe's heaviest flying bird, the great bustard. And I'll just finish the illustrated section of this evening before we get up to some questions and chat with the magnificent so-called foam bath display of the great bustard. I think this term was coined by the Collins Bird Guide, but what a fantastic description for the courtship mating display of the male great bustard. Here we are, early April, crack of dawn, and the males are trying their best to attract a mate by contorting themselves into this huge ball of white feathers, a sight to behold. So Extremadura, we do various combination tours. We do Extremadura in the Gredos Mountains, we do Extremadura and Cota Doñana, which I haven't had time to cover tonight, maybe some other time. And we do single center tours in Extremadura. We do a go slow holiday, we do a beginner birding holiday, we do a dragonfly holiday in Extremadura, and all of them have essentially the same ingredients: fantastic birding, big wide open skies, and great food and wine. So hopefully that's whetted your appetite. Extremadura is well known, of course, but perhaps it might be the first time you've heard of those 2 other areas of Spain. If you've got time, do hang around, and we'll be very happy to have a chat, which Sarah will take charge of, and we'll run through any questions that have arisen. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. That was brilliant. We'll just go to our questions now and just check that still got the other panelists.
We're still here.
With us. There we go. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. Wow, what a trip around Italy and Spain. That's been fantastic. We do have some questions that have been coming in. While we're answering these, please do feel free to type some questions as you think of them. The first one is from Mary Ross. She says, I'd love to do the wall creepers and cranes tour, but I note it departs from Stansted, which is just about impossible for me to get to. Any other departures available?
That's a tricky one because we fly into Zaragoza, which is right at the centre of that itinerary, and the only flight that goes to Zaragoza from the UK goes from Stansted. But if that's a real problem, an alternative is to fly to Madrid and take the train to Zaragoza and then meet us in Zaragoza. So that's an option there.
Thanks, Andy. And thank you all for your continued comments that are coming in, thanking us for the evening. Thank you, Tracy. You're very welcome. Thanks, Janet. All the lovely, kind comments coming in. Dan, I've got a question for you from Sharon. She says, Sicily looks fantastic. Thank you for your lovely talk. On the wildflower tour, do you also cover some of the archaeological sites that were on your slides?
I'm afraid, Sarah, that's the only talk from Sicily that's not looked after by my team. Perhaps Andy or Andrew might be able to answer that one.
Sorry, what was that? If archaeology is covered?
Yeah, on the wildflower tour, Sharon is asking, do we also cover some of the archaeological sites that were featured in Dan's slides?
Yes, we do. Yeah, on the wildflowers tour, we do. Yeah.
We have a question here from Catherine Dodd, which Simon and Nikki, you have already answered this, but just in case other people wish to hear this as well, they might be thinking it. What are the temperatures like on the Rhondda trip, please?
So I'm going to say something completely different now, which I've written, but I was actually looking at what the temperature is now. In November, it's normally a little warmer, but the daytime temperatures, anything from 17, 18 degrees Celsius to the low 20s in the sun. And then at night, sometimes it can drop quite radically because we're in the mountains, 5 or 7 degrees Celsius at night, which is really cold for us. So we're not used to that. But fortunately, David and Ivan make sure your rooms are really nice and warm and have all the extra things if you need them. So actually, it's really nice to come back there after a day exploring the mountains, and a warm welcome, great food as well. I have to keep saying about the food there, it's awesome. But, warm welcome as well as a warm room to come back to.
Well, sticking with a food theme, we've had a question asking how easy it is to be vegetarian on this tour or in Spain in general. And I'm glad this question's come up because we have 2 vegetarians here, or 3 actually, including you, Dan. So Simon and Nikki, you could answer that for us. There have been a lot of slides of lovely, delicious looking picnics this evening, some of them looking quite meaty. So please answer that. How is it as a vegetarian? Can you cope? And even as a vegan, how is it?
It's, I mean, as I sort of mentioned in the talk, we're just really blessed here with a really nice range of things to choose from that are all delicious, and some very talented people who know how to prepare them for you as well. So we're both vegetarian. That's right, my dog's just decided to move. We're both vegetarian, and I think in this part of Spain in particular, much as there's many temptations, I'm sure Andy will testify to the deliciousness of the ham. There's just fresh vegetables, locally produced, a lot of organic vegetables, really nice dishes with lots of kind of lentils and pulses and rices and stuff in them as well, sort of typical of the area. I mentioned the cheese. Did I mention the cheese?
You did, yeah.
You know, if you're vegetarian rather than vegan, then there's some really good cheeses that you can eat with a particularly clear conscience, because they tend to be from sheep and goats that have been extensively grazed. And actually what they do is they form part of the management of the national park. So by eating that cheese, you're actually benefiting, it has conservation benefits of its own and a very low carbon footprint compared to cow dairy. Anything, do you want to add anything else?
I think the seasonality.
I'll just say there that how things have developed. So 20 years ago, organising a vegetarian meals for a client in Spain was an absolute nightmare, because the hotelier would wheel out a tuna omelette. I mean, let's just acknowledge that things have just moved on so much in 20 years. And now, well, Puerto Grande, where you two host a lot of our groups, that it's just fantastic cuisine, better than you get in many restaurants.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also the great thing here as well, all the food that we choose is very seasonal. And we're really mindful as well about, we don't use any single-use plastics in our picnics. The guys we work with at Puerto Grande are mindful of this as well. We've eradicated that. And we look at where we can get food locally and extensively sourced, whether it's coming from the natural park, or whether it's coming from the little allotment that's actually on the grounds at Puerto Grande, or Ivan in the hills of Uzcar, getting his chestnuts and mushrooms for the risotto. Yeah, it's great. And I think a part of it as well is that we're blessed here in the south a bit more as well, because of the proximity to Morocco and the different cuisines that have influenced this part of Spain. And actually there are actually quite a lot of very traditional dishes that are completely vegan. So, and they're great to try. So.
Great, thank you both for that. And thank you to Sheila Thomas as well, who's commented to everyone. She says, I cooked well as a vegan in Andalucia, in Rhondda and in Extremadura. Thank you, Sheila. a question from Roy, who says, oh, it's not a question from Roy, it's just a prompt from Roy about wolf watching. But we did have another question on the wolf watching. Andy, how likely is it that you'll see a wolf on the wolf watching tour in Spain?
We've got a 98% success rate. I think we've had 1 or perhaps 2 failures since I led the first ever tour in 2006. So you're almost guaranteed to see a wolf, but it might be, you know, a view for the record. You're not going to get point-to-point views for fantastic photos. Like I said in the talk, it's a thrill just to see these wolves, but a very good chance of seeing one through optics. Yeah, I'd just like to thank Tony Fisher for your comment. Just going back to, well, getting particularly to the wall creepers and crane strip, we did a train from Nottingham to Zaragoza. And it's an interesting one, this, you know, people wanting to join wildlife holidays without taking to the skies for whatever reason. And I think you mentioned Seat 61. That's a fantastic website for planning train travel. And what I would say to that is, where there's a will, there's a way. You can get from the UK by train to the farthest corners of Europe. You just need to invest a bit of time and money in doing it, and we can help advise. So yeah, great example there of a couple that took the train, got on the train in Nottingham, met our group in Zaragoza, and didn't have to pass through an airport. It can be done.
Thank you, Andy. We've got another question from Sheila Thomas, who asks, which Spanish trip gives the best chance of seeing lynx? You haven't had a chance to chat about lynx this evening. I know you could do a whole talk on it, but if you could just quickly answer which tour would give the best chance.
Well, neither Niki nor Simon nor myself have covered Cota Doñana this evening. We would have to save that for another webinar at some point. But Niki and Simon, you've both led that tour on a number of occasions for me. I led the first ever one in 2006. The tour is called Realm of the Lynx. Do you want to say a few words about it? You've been there more recently than me.
I think we've had about ourselves, we've had about what, a 95%, 90% hit rate. So, and yeah, the beauty of that, you have 2 real chances. So whether it's at Doñana itself or up in Andújar as well, you can find the links in both areas. And the timing of those tours is really important. It's the timing is at the peak of their activity when they're looking for mates. So you're more likely to encounter them during the hours in the morning and afternoon and evening. Even in the middle of the day, we've seen them. I think one of the on that tour, Andy, I think the record we had was 7 in one day, which was up at Andújar, which was amazing. So yeah, that's our record. It's yet to be broken, I think, but maybe other people have broken it. But we're looking to break it when everything returns to normal.
7 in one day, that is really going for it. But yeah, a tour of 2 halves there. You spend the first couple of nights in Cota Doñana. So the lynx watching there, you essentially take to a 4-wheel drive truck, a bit like the one Dan showed you on Mount Etna, and you drive around Cota Doñana National Park in safari style. And then we drive up to the other side of Sevilla to Andújar. And there the tour is much more stationary scanning, a bit like I was describing with the wolf watching. You'll get taken to a panoramic viewpoint and scan across the vast tract of open countryside, hoping to see some movement. So it's a nice tour there. You've got the contrast, but we do take you to the 2 prime lynx habitats in Western Europe.
Great, thank you both. And thank you all so much for the lovely comments that we've had that are continuing to come in. Thanking Andrew for your stunning photographs of all of the orchids. What a wonderful set of armchair travel that was. Comments from other folks. Another excellent evening of presentations and escapism. Thank you to our panelists. Well, thank you to all of you for attending. It's been another fantastic evening. Presenters, I don't think you've got anything further to add. Do we? No. And that's all we've got time for this evening, but thank you all so much for joining us. If you do have any questions that you think of later this evening or after the talks, then please do just fire those in to us. Be more than happy to answer those for you. And a huge thank you for joining us tonight, and to all of the presenters for joining as well. This is the 7th presentation evening that we've run so far. If you've missed any of our previous ones, then don't worry, they are available to watch online. If you just hop onto our online presentation evening web page on our website, you'll be able to see all of the links on there at the bottom of the page and enjoy them and watch them at your leisure. We do have more dates in the pipeline, so please do feel welcome to sign up for more. If you'd like to give us any feedback, then please do just email us at info@naturetrek.co.uk. And finally, if you're a member of a natural history club or society and you'd like a Naturetrek speaker to deliver an online presentation to your members free of charge, then we are happy to do that. Please just contact either myself at sarah@naturetrek.co.uk or the info@naturetrek.co.uk email address, and we'll be very happy to arrange that for you. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow at 7:30, where we'll be covering wildlife holidays on our very doorstep here in the UK, taking you across England and into Scotland. We hope you can join us. We'll stay online for the next 5 minutes or so, just in case any of you think of any last-minute questions. But until the next time, take care, and thank you all very much for joining, and good night.